This is not a dream. This can be done, but it's a very bottom-up thing. So you need to sort of rebuild those organizations with a different purpose than just the pursuit of short-term profit. You need to be longer term. You need to go back to the roots of capitalism, which is we're just trying to solve a problem.
Welcome to the New Enlightenment podcast from Adam Smith's Panmure House. I'm Adam Dixon. Today I'm joined by Jean-Baptiste Wautier, who is a distinguished figure in the financial sector, known for his extensive experience in private equity, mergers and acquisitions, board governance, and corporate finance. Until recently, JB, as I call him, was Chief Investment Officer of BC Partners, a London-based private equity firm that he helped grow to over $40 billion in his 2 decades at the firm. JB is currently focused on developing venture philanthropy, which we will discuss today, in addition to writing regularly for outlets such as Les Echos and Project Syndicate. JB is also a visiting lecturer at Sciences Po in Paris, and I'm also happy to say that JB is an executive fellow of ours at Panmure House. JB, welcome to the New Enlightenment.
Thank you, Adam. Thanks for having me.
So let's talk about capitalism. What's wrong with capitalism today, and what do we need to do about it?
Oh my God, how much time do we have? I had a lecture yesterday. You talked about my lectures at Sciences Po in Paris, exactly about that topic and whether we should throw the baby with the bathwater when it comes to capitalism and liberalism. And it was refreshing to hear from the students. These are, students from all over the world in their first year of masters, that they actually get it when it comes to the benefits of capitalism and liberalism. And I tend to talk about those two because they go hand in hand together with the way we've been enjoying democracies in the West for many decades. And they totally understand the two aspects that have been incredibly beneficial to our countries, which is one, the wealth creation that it generated, and second, the agency, the freedom that comes with it. And so they're still very attached to it, even though sometimes they take it for granted, but they're still very attached to those benefits, and they understand how capitalism needs to be preserved because it's still the best way of creating wealth. But they also, of course, very sensitive to the issues I'm sure we're going to talk about when it comes to inequalities, when it comes to, I would say, overall impact on inequalities, on societies and the rest of it. So I do think capitalism and liberalism, our current model, has issues that we need to solve. But I also think that it's about reinventing the model rather than getting rid of it altogether, because we still haven't found any alternative to capitalism when it comes to rewarding risk-taking, rewarding efforts, hard work. I don't think there's any better model out there that enables wealth creation and agency. So it's about reinventing capitalism rather than getting rid of it altogether.
So in that reinvention, and I know there's been much written about it, and you go to the airport and you see some business gurus writes a book saying this is how we kind of save capitalism and how we make it prosperous again, and we address these issues. I tend to always look at those as with a skeptical gaze, partly because I find that they often egg up the benefits of capitalism. As you mentioned, it's an innovation machine. It's the wealth creation is possible, but they underplay the harms and what we can't just leave to capitalism alone to address. So I'm curious, in your view, let's talk about the negatives before we talk about the positives and how we can, because I think without addressing the negatives first, then we can't really speak confidently about the positives.
I agree.
So what do you think you mentioned things like inequality. How do you see that? I know, you've attended regularly the World Economic Forum in Davos, and I remember you once relating a story to me that you were at a dinner and, you know, they just, with a lot of very high net worth individuals that seemed to not care. They were more worried about, you know, the inheritance that they're going to give to their children and grandchildren rather than worrying about, the planet and the 7 billion plus people else there, right? So tell me, what are the negatives? How do we focus on those and make those better?
So there's a lot to unpick in what you said. I think trying to answer the first part of the question, to me there are like three buckets of issues, and I tend to, because of what you said about these interactions I had with lots of people who didn't really care, and unfortunately still is the case. I tend to avoid any moral consideration, because of course we could put moral and philosophy and even religion for those who are religious, but it's not going to help, right? Because we're going to disagree immediately on what's moral, what's not moral, and there's so much culture in there that I think we should care about efficiency for the greater number, and well-being for the greater number, as opposed to any other consideration of what is moral, what is good, what should be done. So if we try and go through that lens, I think again there's three buckets. The first one, you talked about it, is inequality. Inequality, not in a moral sense. Inequality in the sense that if you concentrate wealth into too few hands, you're not extracting the full potential of a society, number one, because if you have billions of net wealth, the vast majority of this money either will never be invested in the real economy or will be invested in unproductive assets like art, like, already built homes, yachts, planes, whatever. And so the return on that investment is virtually nothing. So there's no trickling down economy. That, I think, is now established. Well, there might be trickling down economy if there's less concentration of wealth. But in a very concentrated society like we have today, there's an efficiency issue. And today, as you probably know this statistic, that 1% of the population has 43% of the total wealth globally, it's a mad number. And it can't be an efficient way of, growing the economy and investing this capital, right? So inequality breeds inefficiency. Inefficiency lead to a lack of progression for the masses. They can't really see their purchasing power improving. They can't really see their kids being better off than them. And this leads to political discontent and the type of political trends we're observing now in the West, whether it's in the US or in most countries in Europe, where it's all about populist rhetoric and it's all about very broken and very bifurcated societies, where it's very hard to reunite countries and societies with the two sides. So inequality is a big problem, and it just goes spiraling, because the more the wealth is concentrated, the more it's going to be concentrated, because this wealth will compound, and the more it's going to breed political discontent. The second one is about, and I don't like to talk about climate change in the narrow sense, because it's first, scientifically, there's a lot of debates about correlation versus causality. There's a lot of debate about how much is human-made versus how much is other parameters. There's no denial that there's a change in climate, but there's a debate about how much is humans versus how much is the rest. And to me, it's an even broader issue, which is about pollution, but also, we don't talk about health issues, but 40% of US population is defined medically as obese today. Isn't that a problem? To me, it's as big a problem as climate change or plastic pollution or what have you. So we do have a lot of negative externalities when it comes to the planet and nature in the global sense. And that, again, it's not a question of religion or what science are you looking at. I think we can all agree that we shouldn't be destroying this unique asset that we inherited, and we need to find ways to reduce those negative externalities. So that's the second bucket. It's sort of call it nature destruction or planet destruction. The third one, which is often either overlooked or considered as of lesser importance, is this tendency of capitalism to generate booms and busts. And I think it may be less structural, or it may be less relevant, because you could say, oh, there's been the Great Depression in the 30s, and then there's been the global financial crisis in 2008. So, okay, tough luck for the ones that were born in the wrong decade, but globally it sort of works. So forget about the dips. I would argue two things. One, it's generations of people that suddenly live in poverty and find life really tough. So I don't think it's incredibly fair to a few generations that were unlucky. And second, it still revealed that there are issues in the way capitalism works at its core and in the world of finance that I know well. So I think this boom and bust model is fed by the wrong behavior and the obsession with greed and short-term profit. And it's actually interesting to look into this to understand the root cause of the issues that feeds the other two buckets. So I would say maybe that third bucket is less relevant, but it's still relevant. And this is the third set of issues that I see in capitalism.
So let's unpick all three of those. I want to start with the second one, just because that's on the top of my thinking right now, and on climate change, right? So it's, as you mentioned, there's no doubt we have a warming planet. There's no doubt that we should do something to stop that. I mean, I don't believe it's going to be necessarily catastrophic. Though if we had 3 or 4 degrees on average temperature increases, that's probably going to be pretty bad. So it may be catastrophic, but we're going to survive at 1.5 or even 2 degrees, possibly even 2.5 degrees. Just, we adapt as humans to a changing climate. Will that have other effects on weather patterns? Probably. Will it have effects on other aspects of the biosphere? Absolutely. Will it require investments in infrastructure? Absolutely. But again, is it catastrophic for human civilization, as so much of the press would have you believe? And I think, and I'm working on a book with a colleague of mine, is the problem with climate change is that it's conflated with just about everything these days. You can't open the newspaper without reading cat climbed up a tree because of climate change, right? I mean, I know I'm making that up, but it's almost every
true.
time you
it's
read,
everywhere.
Always climate change. Americans are obese because of climate change. I mean, that's almost the degree of everything is climate change. Migration is all climate driven. And I find that to be actually a problematic way of looking at it, because when what causes climate change? It's there's natural variance, as you mentioned, but it's greenhouse gas emissions. Right? It's carbon dioxide, it's methane, it's CFCs. That's it, right? You know where those come from? They come from the burning of fossil fuels and agriculture and some other things. It's very we know where it is, and if we want to solve it, well, we change the energy system, or we reduce certain aspects of how the carbon intensity of agriculture. Right? It's all these things where it's actually these are solvable problems. Because we have technologies to do so. Usually, it may not be as expensive, but the point is we need to stop conflating it, because again, it makes the problem much bigger than it actually is. And what it also does, and this goes to your point about, well, consider how many Americans and people in Britain, for that matter, or across Europe, increase.
It's the same percentage in Britain. Yeah.
Of obesity. It's well, okay, we have these other social problems, and we need to attack those specifically for what's causing them, not kind of conflating all these other social and economic and even political issues into every single problem, because it makes things more difficult to solve. Why are Americans so overweight or obese? It's because they eat too much. And why do they eat too much? Well, maybe the food tastes good, probably doesn't, but there's certain things there. And so I think that's so much of the issue, the problem with the problems that we have in capitalism is that we want to conflate everything into being all this sort of systemic, integrated. And yes, there are, certain things cause other problems. That's not to say that. And I don't think that's the argument you're making, but by not identifying what the specific problems are, we can't actually solve those. And so I think that then brings me to another question. I know we could talk about inequality, and I do want to talk about it, but it's how do we mobilize capitalism to solve these problems, right? Because I think most people look at capitalism and say the profit motive it's about just pure self-interest. It's about maximizing profit, and it doesn't matter if it causes harms. How do you see that? So this is getting to the positives of capitalism. How do you see that in terms of addressing the harms?
It's a great question. And before I answer that, I just want to react to one of the things you said, which is, how climate change is conflated and how we see climate change everywhere and stuff. And that's, you're absolutely right. And that's exactly why I think the only way you can, in the end, convince the vast majority that something needs to be done is not by systematically pointing to climate change. And because a lot of people are going to disagree or are going to ask, what's the science behind it? They're going to try and poke holes everywhere, or others are going to reply to you, yeah, it's linked to energy, but energy consumption is going only one way. If you look at the global energy consumption, it's and start in the 2000, hoping that you'd see the curve revert. It's continuous exponential growth. And then once you've realized that 80% of that energy is from fossil fuel, it's from oil, gas, and coal, you understand the magnitude of the problem. So this is not where you're going to solve the issue. And I'm going through a different way, but I'm getting to the same conclusion as you, which is this is not where we're going to find the solution. The solution is indeed at the heart of capitalism, as you suggest in your question. To me, I recently wrote a piece for Project Syndicate called The Profit Trap. And I think it's exactly that. And interestingly, and it was reading a book by Colin Meyer, which was the last of his trilogy. And interestingly, again, he was starting with analyzing capitalism, crisis, booms and busts, to try and get to the heart of the issue. And very convincingly, at least that aligns with what I think and what I've observed as a practitioner. We now have companies and a system that only has one measure of success, and it's profit. But he's right that the obsession of profit as the single measure of success and the single objective of any organization is largely the root cause of the issue. And the answer cannot be, answering the various externalities as we just talked about. But the answer to me is not regulation either. And there's a debate about what's the right level of regulation. I would argue today in our societies, the level of regulation, existing regulation, is already too complex for any organization, let alone small and medium enterprise. There's just too many rules, and they often contradict each other. And so the notion that you could add another huge layer of regulation about measuring the externalities of a company in terms of pollution, in terms of destruction of species, in terms of obesity, health issues, mental health, you name it, that's impossible. How are you going to measure that? How are you going to regulate that? So this notion that it's through regulation or monetization of issues or whatever, I think is farcical. I don't think it's going anywhere. I think it's much more fundamental than that. And again, it's the fact that in a boardroom, and I've been in many boardrooms, in many investment committees my entire career, it is true that we only obsess about profit or return, or depending on the organization. And that's the issue. That is just the issue. And if we go back to basics, and this is Panmure House, so I can't resist quoting Adam Smith, but you just go back to moral sentiment and how it was about purpose, and profit wouldn't be an objective, but a consequence of that. I saw that in private equity. I see that today in um, venture philanthropy. This is not a dream. This can be done, but it's a very bottom-up thing. So you need to sort of rebuild those organizations with a different purpose than just the pursuit of short-term profit. You need to be longer term. You need to go back to the roots of capitalism, which is we're just trying to solve a problem, and we're trying to solve a problem while minimizing the negative externalities and taking care of all the stakeholders. If you rebuild capitalism that way, you're gonna solve everything, or pretty much everything, because suddenly you're taking a long-term perspective, you're focusing on providing society with a solution, and you're taking care of all the negative impacts you could generate as you're trying to solve a problem. And that, I think, is really the heart of the issue. Now, of course, it's not easy to implement, but I think that's the issue. At least I think we seem to identify the root cause.
So I want to ask you, I've got two questions. One is on the energy transition. So are you bearish, and you think that we can't solve the problem? And that, I mean, I do see that. I mean, the amount of fossil fuel that we're still consuming is growing. That's a problem. But at the same time, I think if you just look at I read a statistics the other day that there's more than 10,000 climate tech companies that have been started that are trying to innovate. And we just look at the cost curve for wind and solar. We look at the interest in battery storage. We also look at the nuclear renaissance that we're seeing. I mean, France gets, 80% of its electricity from nuclear, right? Germany sadly closed their nuclear plants, which, should have been after closing their coal mines. But what do you think? I mean, so that's why I look at the innovation that's happening. And I think, well, we can't solve it, and we can still make money doing so. Or you sort of resolve to, we're going to have to burn fossil fuel for the next 100 years.
Well, it's a bit of both. I mean, I, like you, and I believe I'm still a proponent of maintaining, as I said, the capitalism engine, which breeds innovation. And innovation is the thing that will always get us out of a mess. But I'm just trying to be pragmatic. So we've talked about energy consumption. I'm going to pick another example that's even more mind-blowing. The electricity consumption of Google every year is more than Iceland or Ghana or Paraguay. Isn't it mind-blowing? And these companies, are seen as great innovators, as bringing a lot of good to our societies. We all heavy users. None of us is going to just stop using Google tomorrow. And so what I'm trying to say is I don't think we've begun to understand the magnitude of the problem when it comes to energy consumption, because a lot of the innovation that's coming to this world is a heavy user of energy. And, you're reading every day that the Google and the Meta of this world, by the way, Meta is a similar size. So Google and Meta are larger than probably, half of the countries in this world in terms of energy consumption, which is crazy. And now they I mean, you're American. So 3 Mile Island is a name, 3 Mile Island is being reopened because those tech companies need the bloody energy. And this is why this curve, keeps going up. It's because you have intensive energy users that are also innovators at the same time, number one. And number two, it's what you said about population. Population is, by the way, it's already 8 billion. It goes quick, and it's going to be 10 in less than a decade. So you can't just go against those trends. So I'm just trying to be pragmatic. It's just like the people are trying to say, oh, social media is bad for mental health. We should make them illegal, or we should say kids can't have social media. Yeah, good luck with that. So of course, I'd love to be able to find, renewable and innovations, certainly taking care of that. But the sheer size of the issue is just too big for innovation to be able to solve the problem in a few years or in a few decades. So that's why I'm saying we'll be solving that issue in a different way. And because again, good luck in asking the average citizen on the street to stop using Instagram or Google. Then they're just not going to do that. It's that is a long-term trend. So we have to find the answer somewhere else, is what I'm trying to say. Because I would add that there is the proverbial debate between developing countries and more mature countries about energy consumption and about pollution. And what do you tell when we go and tell developing countries you have to be more mindful of your carbon emission? They're going to say, yeah, but what about you? And we're going to say, well, look, we're adopting renewable, we're pushing this, we're pushing that. And they say, yeah, but what have you been doing for the last 200 years? You've been polluting the planet on your own. So it's an impossible discussion. And I don't believe in a global government emerging tomorrow. Again, let's try to be pragmatic. So that's why I keep thinking the answer to this, not that I'm bearish about innovation, I'm bullish about innovation, but this innovation is going to take decades, if not more, to really completely replace those fossil. So we need to do other things in the meantime.
Going back to the case of Meta and is the matters, and they're still profitable companies, but now they see, you can say that they're looking to reopen island or invest in small modular reactors because they have the demand, and that's true. Is that also about being purposeful in their profit and their drive for profit? So, say a bit more about that drive for profit, and if you could, a bit about your experience working in finance for a few decades, working in private equity, buying companies, selling companies. It's profit driven. Is that change over time? Was there ever a moment where there was also purpose, or in the kind of companies you were dealing with? How is it like, right? In terms of.
Sure. So it's going to sound incredibly cynical or bearish again, but bear with me. But there's absolutely no interest in purpose in your average boardroom. But this shouldn't lead to the conclusion that, oh, these people are evil. And this is the way the system works. Okay. If you are the CEO of a listed company, you care about your share price. That's your obsession, because your board cares about your share price, and the board cares about the share price because that's what shareholders want. You bought an Apple share, and what you care about is whether it's going to go up and whether it's going to pay dividend. That's the way the system works. And that's the way retail investors think. When people buy shares, they want those shares to go up in their 401k. They're looking at whether Apple has gone up. So the whole system wants the same thing. And the boardroom is just a reflection of that. And the CEO is just being incentivized by the boardroom to do exactly that. And so what happens is they become incredibly obsessed with profit, because profit will lead to increase in shareholder value, and therefore they're going to get their incentives. So it's all a question about changing that set of incentives. And that's why it's the title of this article was The Profit Trap, because it's a real trap. We are in that trap right now. And the only way I started seeing change in discussions as a practitioner is when suddenly you look at the longer term horizon. Because if you're obsessed with everyday share price, if you're obsessed with your quarter's results, of course, you're not going to care about negative externalities, which will have an impact in 10 years time. Plus, you're not breaking any regulation, so why would you care? You're not paid for that. But if you think with a 10 years horizon, you have to suddenly factor in what society likely will want in 10 years, what regulation could be in 10 years. And so, if you're about to invest in a plastic manufacturing company, you would probably think twice, because the direction of travel, even though today you can still manufacture whatever is you manufacture. The direction of travel is, plastic disappearing, at least single-use plastic disappearing from pretty much anywhere. So that's why I was telling you earlier, the time horizon is a very powerful lever. And when you're in private equity, it's not that you're more virtuous. You have the same cynics around the table, the same people who are just going by the rules, which is all we're interested in is return. But you're looking at 10 years. And if you're looking at 10 years, you have to look at the externalities, because those externalities will make their way into the market, to the regulation at some point, and therefore impact your return. So that is an interesting lever that you could use also on the public side. You don't have to just restrict it to private equity. But again, I go back to the core of the issue, which is, as long as the name of the game is profit or return, you're not going to change the discussion in the boardroom just because that's the way the system works. Investors are just obsessing with return. I told you about those behind closed doors discussions. There was another one which I had, a few years ago at one of the Davos.
Names, fortunately. So
No, let's keep it nameless for now. But
it's a good bit in somewhere else, right?
Yeah. But it's this one was about it was a room full of very important institutional investors. Think of all the largest asset managers in the world from every region, from every continent. Fascinating discussion, and it was about exactly that, which is, how do we fix capitalism? How do we make it more sustainable, more inclusive, whatever? And of course, everybody was saying, yeah, we need to do this. And at some point, I can't resist being a bit provocative at times. I said, okay, I'm going to go one by one, and you're going to tell me how much return your institution is ready to sacrifice in order to be more inclusive or more sustainable. And the answer was unanimously 0. Of course. And again, it's like your question about boardroom CEOs. It's not that they're horrible people or they're evil or they're cynics or they're obsessed with they're being paid. They're being hired. They're being maintaining their positions based on the return they generate. That's the only metric that people care about in their respective organization. Until you change that, you won't change the system or the way the system works.
An opportunity to move on to our discussing your work in venture philanthropy, because I think that is in part about instilling a purpose in the investment process and what you're investing. So perhaps, tell us a bit about that story. So SCI Ventures, which is injury ventures, it's not something that you thought you were going to get into a few years ago, but you've had a family experience. So tell us a bit about that story and what you've learned. Obviously the personal experience, but then also the right? So you have your time at BC Partners, the board, and all of a sudden this life-changing moment happens, and then, okay, how can we make money but also solve problems effectively?
Of course, and it's a great lab for me in terms of making sure that what I'm professing can work in the real world. So, but it starts with a sad story. My wife has a twin brother, like most twins, I guess, incredibly close. So he's like a brother to me. And unfortunately, he had a pretty severe car accident. He just got, bumped into by someone who was just speeding and twirling on the highway. And even though he was doing the right thing, wearing all of his safety equipment, he got hit pretty high in his spinal cord, and he ended up quadriplegic, which is a horrible thing. And because he's fully conscious, he has all of his cognitive abilities, but he has absolutely no autonomy. because he has no movement and nothing from the neck down. So, of course, we've been spending a lot of time trying to help him, to support him, to show him the love and affection that he dearly needs. But of course, that once an investor, an entrepreneur, always an entrepreneur, I was thinking, okay, what else can I do to help beyond supporting him? And came this idea with two other people who got affected, also their immediate family with that type of injury. What about creating a venture fund, but the purely philanthropic one, which would be about making a difference. So investing in, we were all excited by the technology that's out there that could give back some autonomy to these people, whether it's brain-computer interface or robotics or gene therapy. But of course, it's a very narrow field. It's not a very sexy or exciting part of the ecosystem. And so not a lot of money is being invested in those ventures. And so I said, I'd love to do that, and I'd love to help with that. But initially, I was skeptical that we could raise more than the money we were going to put ourselves in this venture, because it was the positioning was the worst. It was a first-time fund. You got the money you're going to invest, you'll never see it again. So it's like a donation. So you're not going to get any financial benefits. You're just giving money away. And it's a condition that's a very, those are mostly sad stories. It's a small set of people globally, even though it's bigger than you think, but it's not like cancer or whatever it is. It's not something where everyone is touched one way or the other. And so I was thinking it's going to be very hard to raise money to start with. And we ended up raising $30 million in 6 months. Partly, of course, credit goes to the guy who's leading that on a day-to-day, with a fantastic entrepreneur and whose brother got the same as my brother-in-law. But also, I think part comes from the fact that we explained to all those donors and foundations that eventually invested that we're going to treat philanthropy as a proper venture capitalists would do. So we do have an investment committee which is composed of private equity veterans like me, or tech entrepreneurs, people who know what they're dealing with. We have an academic committee, which is the best scientists in the field. We have processes. We due diligence companies when we decide to invest in them. And that was appealing to those donors, because they said it's pretty rare that philanthropists would have such a professional approach to decision making. And the way it gets even more interesting is, now that we have money and we've started investing in companies, our first investment committees, were fascinating, because they were both a copycat of the investment committees I've known when I was managing 45 billion on behalf of the largest investors. So we're discussing the same type of issues being discussed, the same type of analysis, the same rigor in the due diligence. The only difference is, when you take the decision, you don't look at the return. You just look at the impact it's going to have and how sustainable this company is. And it's a fascinating thing, because we had lengthy debate about shouldn't we look at returns, because the idea is, if we do our job well, this money will grow. It's an evergreen. We're going to recycle the capital gains and make the pot even bigger. And we quickly concluded what Adam Smith concluded, which is, if those are providing with a society with a solution, they will generate profit. And so, I saw the light. This works. This can work. Now, there's two proviso, of course. One is the time horizon. We come back to the time horizon. If you are thinking, I want to generate a profit in year 3 or in year 4, in year 5, you're restricting the set of opportunities and you're probably missing out on things which are going to have the bigger impact. So you can't be restrictive in your time horizon, or not too restrictive. So we take, for us, it can be 10 years or 15 years. That's fine. We don't look at 50 years because that's too far away, but 10 years is fine. And the second thing is you really need to have somehow a rigor in how you measure impact. So you can't just say, I think it's good. Impact and sustainability of the solution, because the only way those companies end up generating profits is because they do have a meaningful impact on community, and they can survive. They can survive the first years of a startup, which are always, as we know, very, very important. So, but this works. I mean, we've been investing in 4 companies already, the 5th soon. And one of them, to our surprise, got approached 6 months after we made our first investment by professional venture capitalists on a valuation that's 3 times what we invested in 6 months. So on paper, we made 3 times the money in 6 months. And these guys are coming up. We invested $1 million in this startup. These people want to invest 100 million. So our objective of having an impact seeding, trying to attract. So not only we are having an impact, but we're also attracting other sources of capital, which on paper are solely, profit driven, but are coming to invest in that same company. So, it's a very small thing in a very small market, but it's a very convincing example that if you put purpose before profit, you can still maintain the capitalism in its essential form. It's just that profit becomes the consequence as opposed to the objective.
Again, it's the profit, right? So you're when you say sustainable company, it's one that is a going concern, that's not losing money, that's not burning through cash, that's huge profit, but people look at from the outside is that, why do these companies need to make 20 or 30% profit? Why isn't it okay for somebody just, because most businesses, small size enterprises, they make what, 1% profit, 2%? I mean, they're not making
Totally.
but like the financial system is pushed. It's like, oh, you must make these obscene kind of profits. And yeah, I guess it's always the opportunity cost of it. But then, well, the opportunity cost of society by not having these innovations that might not be profitable from the economic sense, but are super profitable from the social and use value for people.
But I think it's, as long as you don't put, as you rightly said, a target number on it and a short-term horizon on it. Again, it's going back to basics and what Adam Smith very managed to summarize in a very concise and easy to understand way. If there has to be a profit generated from the fact that a group of experts or people with particular abilities are going to do by getting together and doing things for the community versus each and one of us doing everything. Because if we go back to, we each need to build our own house, get our own water, do our own bread every day and all the rest of it, it's going to be highly inefficient. I think, so this is why I think you need to go back to the very fundamental start of this capitalism adventure of, can we agree that if we have a group of butchers that specialize in providing meat to the rest of the community, it's going to be a more efficient system than each and one of us having to have our own cattle in our garden. It's an easy one to understand and to convince people that we should keep that. And as long as we keep that, because it's a more efficient way, it's going to generate a surplus. And then maybe that surplus takes 10 years. Maybe that surplus, as you said, is 2% of margin as opposed to 15%. But it's still a surplus. It still works better, both in terms of efficiency, but also quality of the output for all of us. So that's why, to me, we need to start at this very high level to sort of find alignment with most that this is the right way of getting organized. It's just a question of how we measure things and what's the objective of a corporate.
Do you thing like SCI Ventures into, a Google size, let's say, company, right? I mean, how is it that I kind of think about Elon Musk, who many people hate now, investing in kind of these ideas that people find crazy, like Neuralink or, Starlink or all these kind of things. And he seems to almost have, he almost seems to not care about the profitability either. He's more focused on an outcome. He wants to put human Mars, right? So is that we really need to do is just, because I think SCI Ventures in a niche kind of very focused manner around spinal cord injury, you're focused on the outcome more than anything, right? We want to make profit because we don't want to lose our money. It's more, it's the purpose is to solve a particular problem. Is that what we need? I mean, how do we get that? How do we instill that level of thinking into, and just to go back to Elon Musk, I mean, I know people dislike him, but he has massively disrupted the automotive sector through Tesla. I mean, we look at what's happening in Europe with the automotive sector, or even in the United States for the older companies, and recognize it's like, well, car manufacturers ignored battery electric vehicles. And it's like, oh, they're behind the curve, and they're behind the curve because they don't have the patents, they don't have the technology. Mm-hmm. The future has left them behind.
Totally.
In that respect, that's why, capitalism and big markets work, because they're under their stock share prices collapsing. I mean, their social outcomes are bad for people losing their jobs, but, it's of solving a problem, right? I mean, how do we get that in there to just like, how do you get a big private equity firm to have that focus?
So it's
asset manager to have that focus.
There's a lot to unpick again, but so how do you get something like SCI Ventures to scale? It's very easy. You just accumulate. You just recycle your gains over time. And that's the beauty of accumulation is you just compound, and therefore that's how you're going to scale. So you go back to, again, that notion that capitalism, as long as you accumulate and reach a certain size, you're gonna be able to scale and have the capital you need to become bigger and bigger. And in a way, that's what Musk did. So, Musk, it's fascinating, right? So first of all, you have to admire the guy, even if you don't like him. It's always the same thing. Human beings are complex animals, so there's always good and bad in everyone. But you have to admire the level of innovation and risk taking that he went for. But look at the output as well. And this is a great illustration of the good and the bad of current capitalism. You were talking about the German manufacturers, which were the absolute benchmark of the automotive industry for many decades. The market cap of Tesla is $1 trillion. The market cap, whether you take Volkswagen, Porsche, BMW, on average 50 billion, 1 trillion, all at 50 billion. And it just happened like that. So what I'm trying to say when I say it's the good and the bad in there is it's great that he could, because he brought so much innovation and good innovation to the market, that he could accumulate so quickly and get the ability to scale these solutions. But it's led to an extreme, which is why some people now are saying, I don't like the guys, because if you're if you're the wealthiest man on the planet and you worth $1 billion, it's not the same that if you're worth $200 billion. And it's easier to not care about money or short-term profit when you have 200 billion at the bank than when you have zero, right? So of course he's enjoying that freedom now, which is great, but he's also enjoying a level of unchecked power and the lack of checks and balances, because we are in this environment where we're going to an extreme in terms of wealth concentration, which leads to power concentration, which leads to discontent. And sometimes, he's not doing illegal stuff, right? So people may hate it, but it's not breaking any rules. But still, people think it's going too far. And I sort of understand where this is coming from. Is not God. Is not, the one and only that knows everything about everything. And so, of course, he's going to make mistakes. Of course, he's going to do stupid things. Of course, he's going to say stupid stuff. But he's in such a position of power today by being worth 200 billion and managing a 1 trillion company that, this is not working as it should in terms of how people are going to sort of align with him and say, he's one of the greatest innovators of all time. So that's where you have the bad as well, is because it's all concentrated into one guy who has a lot of wealth and a lot of power and can do also stupid things. So I think, yes, the scale will come as long as there is the profit that accumulates, and that's the first part of the answer to your question. And in terms of how you sort of get there, again, it's about everyone aligning on what is the purpose of a company, and this purpose has to be a higher purpose. Now, if suddenly investors are being incentivized and measured according to how you're aligning with the higher purpose of the companies in which you invest, it's going to be a very different discussion. People will start caring about external, negative externalities, will start to care about impact on health and well-being and environment. And so it's the whole stakeholder capitalism approach that's being discussed at the moment, which I think is the way. And that's why we go back to this notion that if profit is the objective and not a consequence, you will stay in that trap. You just need to stop that vicious circle.
This profit is a consequence of solving problems.
Exactly.
You have been listening to the New Enlightenment podcast from Adam Smith's Panmure House. If you found this interesting, please consider subscribing and sharing. If you would like to learn more about Panmure House, please go to our website, panmurehouse.org. Thanks for listening, and until next time.